Introductory Materials of Oscar Wilde, A Study. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. Oscar Wilde, A Study by André Gide and translated by Stuart Mason. Introductory Materials. Dedication. To Donald Bruce Wallace of New York, in memory of a visit last summer to Bagneux Cemetery, a pilgrimage of love when we watered with our tears the roses and lilies with which we covered the poet's grave. Oxford, September 1905. A poem by Wilde. The little poem on the opposite page first saw the light in the pages of the Dublin University Magazine for September 1876. It has not been reprinted since. The Greek quotation is taken from the Agamemnon of Aeschylus, 1:120. Ailenon aunon aipe to Dieu nikato. Oh, well for him who lives at ease with garnered gold in wide domain, nor heeds the plashing of the rain, the crashing down of forest trees. Oh, well for him who ne'er hath known the travail of the hungry years, a father gray with grief and tears, a mother weeping all alone. But well for him whose feet hath trod the weary road of toil and strife, yet from the sorrows of his life builds ladders to be nearer God. Oscar F. O. F. Wills Wilde, S.M. Magdalen College, Oxford. Translator's Note. M. Gide's study of Mr. Oscar Wilde, perhaps the best account yet written of the poet's latter days, appeared first in L'Hermitage, a monthly literary review, in June 1902. It was afterwards reprinted with some few slight alterations in a volume of critical essays entitled Prétextes by M. Gide. It is now published in English for the first time by special arrangement with the author. S.M. Oscar Wilde Introductory. Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde was born at 1 Merrion Square, North Dublin, on October 16, 1854. He was the second son of Sir William Robert Wilde, Knight, a celebrated surgeon, who was president of the Irish Academy and chairman of the Census Committee. Sir William Wilde was born in 1799 and died at the age of 77 years. Oscar Wilde's mother was Jane Francesca, daughter of Archdeacon L.G. She was born in 1826 and married in 1851. She became famous in literary circles under the pen names of Speranza and John Fenshaw Ellis, among her published writings being Driftwood from Scandinavia, 1884, Legends of Ireland, 1886, and Social Studies, 1893. Lady Wilde died at her residence in Chelsea on February 3, 1896. Oscar Wilde received his early education at Portora Royal School, Enniskillen, which he entered in 1864 at the age of 9 years. Here he remained for 7 years, and winning a Royal Scholarship, he entered Trinity College, Dublin, on October 19, 1871, being then 17 years of age. In the following year he obtained first-class honors in classics in Hilary, Trinity, and Michaelmas terms. He also won the gold medal for Greek and other distinctions. The Trinity College magazine, Codabos, for the year 1876-9, contains some of his earliest published poems. In 1874 he obtained a classical scholarship and went up to Oxford, where, as a demi, he matriculated at Magdalen College on October 17th, the day after his 20th birthday. His career at Oxford was one unbroken success. In Trinity Term, June 1876, he obtained a first class in the Honours School of Classical Moderations in Litteris Graecis et Latinis, which he followed up 2 years later by a similar distinction in Greats or Honour Finals in Litteris Humanaroribus. In this same Trinity Term, 1878, He further distinguished himself by gaining the Sir Roger Newdigate Prize for English verse with his poem Ravenna, which he recited at the Encene, or annual commemoration of benefactors, in the Sheldonian Theatre on June 26th. He proceeded to the degree of B.A. in the following term. He is described in Foster's Alumni Oxiensis as a professor of aesthetics and art critic. He afterwards lectured on art in America, 1882, and in the provinces on his return to England. About this time he wrote his poems, The Sphinx and The Harlot's House, 1883, and his tragedy in blank verse, The Duchess of Padua. The latter was written specially for Miss Mary Anderson, but she did not produce it. This was, however, played in America by the late Lawrence Barrett in 1883, as was also another play in blank verse entitled Vera, or The Nihilists, during the previous year. He had already published in America and England a volume of poems which went through several editions in a few months. In 1884 Oscar Wilde married Miss Constance Mary Lloyd, a daughter of the well-known Q.C., by whom he had two sons, born in June 1885 and November 1886, respectively. Mrs. Wilde died in 1898, and his only brother William in March of the following year. During the next 5 or 6 years after his marriage, articles from his pen appeared in several of the leading reviews, notably The Portrait of Mr. W. H. in Blackwood's Edinburgh Magazine for July, 1889, and those brilliant essays afterwards incorporated in Intentions in the 19th Century and the Fortnightly Review. In 1888 he was the editor of a monthly journal called The Woman's World. In July, 1890, The Picture of Dorian Gray appeared in Lippincott's Monthly Magazine. It was the only novel he ever wrote, and was published in book form with 7 additional chapters in the following year, and is one of the most remarkable books in the English language. With the production and immediate success of Lady Windermere's Fan early in 1892, he was at once recognized as a dramatist of the first rank. This was followed a year later by A Woman of No Importance, and after brief intervals by An Ideal Husband and The Importance of Being Earnest. The two latter were being played in London at the time of the author's arrest and trial. Into the melancholy story of his trial it is not proposed to enter here beyond mentioning the fact that he was condemned by the newspapers, and consequently by the vast majority of the British public, several weeks before a jury could be found to return a verdict of guilty. On Saturday, May 25, 1895, he was sentenced to 2 years' imprisonment with hard labor, most of which period was passed at Wandsworth and Reading. On his release from Reading on Wednesday, May 19, 1897, he at once crossed to France with friends, and a few days later penned that pathetic letter, pregnant with pity, in which he pleaded for the kindlier treatment of little children lying in our English jails. This letter, with his own name attached, filled over 2 columns in the Daily Chronicle of May 28. It created considerable sensation, a well-known Catholic weekly comparing it in its crushing power to the letter with which Stevenson shamed the shameless traducer of Father Damien. A second letter on the subject of the cruelties of the English prison system appeared in the same paper on March 24, 1898. It was headed, "Don't read this if you want to be happy today," and was signed, "The Author of the Ballad of Reading Gaol." The Ballad of Reading Gaol was published early in this same year under the nom de plume C.33, Oscar Wilde's prison number. Its authorship was acknowledged shortly afterwards in an autograph edition. Since that time, countless editions of this famous work have been issued in England and America, and translations have appeared in French, German, and Spanish. Of this poem a reviewer in a London journal said, "The whole is awful as the pages of Sophocles. that he has rendered with his fine art so much of the essence of his life and the life of others in that inferno to the sensitive, is a memorable thing for the social scientist, but a much more memorable thing for literature. This is a simple, a poignant, a great ballad, one of the greatest in the English language. Of the sorrows and sufferings of the last few years of his life, his friend, Mr. Robert Harborough Sherard, has written in The Story of an Unhappy Friendship, and M. Gide refers to them in the following pages. After several weeks of intense suffering, Death, the silent pilot, came at last, and the most brilliant writer of the 19th century passed away on the afternoon of November 30th, 1900, in poverty and almost alone. The little hotel in Paris, Hôtel d'Alsace, 13 Rue des Beaux-Arts, where he died, has become a place of pilgrimage from all parts of the world for those who admire his genius or pity his sorrows. He was buried 3 days later in the cemetery at Bagneux, about 4 miles out of Paris. Stuart Mason. Tombstone inscription: Oscar Wilde, October 16, 1854, November 30, 1900. Verbis meis adere nihil adabant, et super illos stillabat eloquium meum. Job 29:22. R.I.P. End of introductory materials. Chapter 1 of Oscar Wilde, A Study, by André Gide, and translated by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. I was at Biskra in December 1900 when I learned through the newspapers of the lamentable end of Oscar Wilde. Distance, alas, prevented me from joining in the meagre procession which followed his body to the cemetery at Bagneux. It was of no use reproaching myself that my absence would seem to diminish still further the small number of friends who remained faithful to him. At least I wanted to write these few pages at once, but for a considerable period Wilde's name seemed to become once more the property of the newspapers. Now that every idle rumor connected with his name, so sadly famous, is hushed, now that the mob is at last wearied after having praised, wondered at, and then reviled him, perhaps a friend may be allowed to lay, like a wreath on a forsaken grave, these lines of affection, admiration, and respectful pity. When the trial, with all its scandal, which so excited the public mind in England, threatened to wreck his life, certain writers and artists attempted to carry out, in the name of literature and art, a kind of rescue. It was hoped that by praising the writer the man would be excused. Unfortunately, there was a misunderstanding here, for it must be acknowledged that Wilde was not a great writer. The leaden buoy which was thrown to him helped only to weigh him down. His works, far from keeping him up, seemed to sink with him. In vain were some good hands stretched out. The torrent of the world overwhelmed him. All was over. It was not possible at that time to think of defending him in any other way. Instead of trying to shelter the man behind his work, it was necessary to show forth first the man as an object of admiration, as I am going to try to do now, and then the work itself illuminated by his personality. I have put all my genius into my life. I have put only my talent into my works, said Wilde once. Great writer, no, but great viveur, yes, if one may use the word in the fullest sense of the French term. Like certain Greek philosophers of old, Wilde did not write his wisdom, but spoke and lived it, entrusting it rashly to the fleeting memory of man, thereby writing it, as it were, on water. Let those who knew him for a longer time than I did tell the story of his life. One of those who listened to him most eagerly relates here simply a few personal recollections. 1. And the mighty nations would have crowned me, who am crownless now, and without name, and some orient dawn had found me kneeling on the threshold of the House of Fame. Those who became acquainted with Wilde only in the latter years of his life form a wrong conception of the wonderful creature he formerly was, if they judge from the enfeebled and crushed being given back to us from prison, as Ernest Le Jeunesse paints him, for instance, in the best, or rather the only passable article on the great reprobate which anyone has had the talent or the courage to write. It was in 1891 that I met him for the first time. Wilde had then what Thackeray calls one of the greatest of a great man's qualities, success. His manner and his appearance were triumphant. His success was so assured that it seemed to go in front of him, and he only had to advance. His books were causing wonder and delight. All London was soon to rush to see his plays. He was rich, he was great, he was handsome, he was loaded with happiness and honors. Some compared him to an Asiatic Bacchus, others to some Roman emperor, and others again to Apollo himself. In short, he was resplendent. In Paris his name passed from mouth to mouth as soon as he arrived. Several absurd sayings went around concerning him, as that after all he was only the man who smoked gold-tipped cigarettes and walked about the streets with a sunflower in his hand. For, skillful in misleading those who are the heralds of earthly fame, Wilde knew how to hide his real personality behind an amusing phantom, with which he humorously deluded the public. I had heard him talked about at Stéphane Mallarmé's house, where he was described as a brilliant conversationalist, and I expressed a wish to know him, little hoping that I should ever do so. A happy chance, or rather a friend, gave me the opportunity, and to him I made known my desire. Wilde was invited to dinner. It was at a restaurant. We were a party of 4, but 3 of us were content to listen. Wilde did not converse, he told tales. During the whole meal he hardly stopped. He spoke in a slow, musical tone, and his very voice was wonderful. He knew French almost perfectly, but pretended now and then to hesitate a little for a word to which he wanted to call our attention. He had scarcely any accent, at least only what it pleased him to affect when it might give a somewhat new or strange appearance to a word. For instance, he used purposely to pronounce scepticisme as skepticisme. The stories he told us without a break that evening were not of his best. Uncertain of his audience, he was testing us, for in his wisdom, or perhaps in his folly, he never betrayed himself into saying anything which he thought would not be to the taste of his hearers. So he doled out food to each according to his appetite. Those who expected nothing from him got nothing, or only a little light froth, and as at first he used to give himself up to the task of amusing, many of those who thought they knew him will have known him only as the amuser. When dinner was over we went out. My 2 friends walking together, Wilde took me aside and said quite suddenly, "You hear with your eyes. That is why I am going to tell you this story." He began, "When Narcissus died, the flowers of the fields were plunged in grief and asked the river for drops of water that they might mourn for him." "Oh," replied the river, "if all my drops of water were tears, I should not have enough to weep for Narcissus myself. I loved him." "How could you help loving Narcissus?" rejoined the flowers. "So beautiful was he." "Was he beautiful?" asked the river. "And who should know that better than yourself?" said the flowers. "For every day, lying on your bank, he would mirror his own beauty in your waters." Wilde stopped for a moment and then went on. "If I loved him," replied the river, "it is because when he hung over my waters I saw the reflection of my waters in his eyes." Then Wilde, drawing himself up, added with a strange outburst of laughter, "That is called the disciple." We had reached his door and left him. He asked me to meet him again. During the course of that year and the next I saw him frequently and everywhere. In the presence of others, as I have mentioned, Wilde would put on an air of showing off in order to astonish or amuse or even exasperate people. He never listened to, and scarcely took any notice of, an idea from the moment it was no longer purely his own. When he was no longer the only one to shine, he would shut himself up, and emerge again only when one found oneself alone with him once more. But as soon as we were alone again, he would begin, "Well, what have you been doing since yesterday?" Now, as at that time my life was passing uneventfully enough, the telling of what I had been doing was of no interest. So to humour him, I began recounting some trifling incidents, and noticed while I was speaking that Wilde's face was growing gloomy. "You really did that?" he said. "Yes," I answered. "And you are speaking the truth?" "Absolutely." "Then why repeat it? You must see that it is not of the slightest importance. You must understand that there are two worlds. The one exists and is never talked about. It is called the real world because there is no need to talk about it in order to see it. The other is the world of art. One must talk about that because otherwise it would not exist." Then he went on. "Once upon a time there was a man who was beloved in his village because he used to tell tales. Every morning he left the village, and when he returned in the evening, all the labourers of the village who had been working all the day would crowd around him and say, 'Come now, tell us a tale. What have you seen to-day?' The man said, 'I've seen in the forest a faun playing on a flute and making a band of little wood nymphs dance.' 'Go on with your story. What did you see?' the men would say. 'When I reached the seashore, I saw 3 mermaids beside the waves, combing their green hair with golden combs.' And the villagers loved him because he used to tell them tales. One morning he left his village as usual, and when he reached the seashore, he saw 3 mermaids at the water's edge, combing their green hair with golden combs. And as he passed on his way, he saw, near a wood, a faun playing a flute to a band of wood nymphs. That evening, when he returned to his village, the people said to him, as they did every evening, 'Come, tell us a tale. What have you seen?' And the man answered, 'I have seen nothing.'" Wilde stopped for a moment to allow the effect of the story to sink into me, and then he continued, "I do not like your lips. They are quite straight, like the lips of a man who has never told a lie. I want you to learn to lie, so that your lips may become beautiful and curved like the lips of an antique mask. Do you know what makes the work of art and what makes the work of nature? Do you know what the difference is? For the narcissus is as beautiful as a work of art, so what distinguishes them cannot be merely beautiful. Do you know what it is that distinguishes them? A work of art is always unique. Nature, who makes nothing durable, is ever repeating herself, so that nothing she makes may be lost. A single narcissus produces many blooms. That is why each one lives but a day. Every time nature invents a new form, she at once makes a replica. A sea monster in one sea knows that in another sea there is another monster like itself. When God creates in history a Nero, a Borgia, or a Napoleon, he puts another one on one side. No one knows it, but that does not matter. The important point is that one may be a success. For God makes man, and man makes the work of art." Forestalling what I was on the point of saying, he proceeded, "Yes, I know. One day a great restlessness fell upon the earth, as if at last nature was going to create something unique, something quite unique. And Christ is born on earth. Yes, I know quite well, but listen. When Joseph of Arimathea came down in the evening from Mount Calvary, where Jesus had just died, he saw on a white stone a young man seated, weeping. And Joseph went near to him and said, 'I understand how great thy grief must be, for certainly that man was a just man.' But the young man made answer, 'Oh, it is not for that I am weeping. I am weeping because I too have wrought miracles. I also have given sight to the blind. I have healed the palsied, and I've raised the dead. I too have caused the barren fig tree to wither away, and I have turned water into wine. And yet they have not crucified me." And that Oscar Wilde was convinced of his representative mission was made quite clear to me on more than one occasion. The gospel disturbed and troubled the pagan Wilde. He could not forgive it its miracles. The pagan miracle lies in the work of art. Christianity encroached on it. Every strong departure from realism in art demands a realism which is convinced in life. His most ingenious fables, his most alarming ironies, were uttered with a view to confront the two moralities, I mean pagan naturalism and Christian idealism, and to put the latter out of countenance in every respect. This is another of his stories. When Jesus was minded to return to Nazareth, Nazareth was so changed that he no longer recognized his own city. The Nazareth where he had lived was full of lamentations and tears. This city was filled with outbursts of laughter and song. And Christ, entering into the city, saw some slaves laden with flowers hastening towards the marble staircase of a house of white marble. Christ entered into the house, and at the back of a hall of jasper he saw, lying on a purple couch, a man whose disordered locks were mingled with red roses, and whose lips were red with wine. Christ drew near to him, and laying his hand on his shoulder, said to him, "Why dost thou lead this life?" The man turned round, recognized him, and said, "I was a leper once. Thou didst heal me. Why should I live another life?" Christ went out of the house, and behold, in the street he saw a woman whose face and raiment were painted, and whose feet were shod with pearls. And behind her walked a man who wore a cloak of 2 colors, and whose eyes were bright with lust. And Christ went up to the man, and laid his hand on his shoulder, and said to him, "Tell me, why art thou following this woman, and why dost thou look at her in such wise?" The man, turning round, recognized him, and said, "I was blind. Thou didst heal me. What else should I do with my sight?" And Christ drew near to the woman, and said to her, "This road which thou art following is the pathway of sin. Why follow it?" The woman recognized him, and laughing said, "The way which I follow is a pleasant way, and thou hast pardoned all my sins." Then Christ felt his heart filled with sadness, and he was minded to leave the city. But as he was going out of it, he saw sitting by the bank of the moat of the city a young man who was weeping. He drew near to him, and touching the locks of his hair, said to him, "Friend, why dost thou weep?" The young man raised his eyes, recognized him, and made answer, "I was dead, and thou hast raised me to life. What else should I do with my life?" Let me tell this one story more, illustrating one of the strangest pitfalls into which the imagination can mislead a man, and let any one who is able understand the strange paradox which Wilde here makes use of. Then there was a great silence in the judgment hall of God, and the soul of the sinner stood naked before God. And God opened the book of the life of the sinner, and said, "Surely thy life hath been very evil. Thou hast," there followed a wonderful, a marvelous list of sins. "Since thou hast done all this, surely I will send thee to hell." And the man cried out, "Thou canst not send me to hell." And God said to the man, "Wherefore can I not send thee to hell?" And the man made answer and said, "Because in hell I have always lived." And there was a great silence in the judgment hall of God. And God spake and said to the man, "Seeing that I may not send thee to hell, I am going to send thee to heaven." "Thou canst not send me to heaven." And God said to the man, "Wherefore can I not send thee to heaven?" And the man said, "Because I have never been able to imagine it." And there was a great silence in the judgment hall of God. One morning Wilde handed me an article in which a sufficiently dense critic congratulated him on knowing how to write pretty stories in which the better to clothe his thoughts. "They think," began Wilde, "that all thoughts come naked to the birth. They do not understand that I cannot think otherwise than in stories. The sculptor does not try to reproduce his thoughts in marble. He thinks in marble straight away. Now listen. There was once a man who could think only in bronze. And this man one day had an idea of the pleasure that abideth for a moment. And he felt that he must give expression to it. But in the whole world there was but one single piece of bronze, for men had used it all up. And this man felt that he would go mad if he did not give expression to his idea. And he remembered a piece of bronze on the tomb of his wife, a statue which he had himself fashioned to set on the tomb of his wife, the only woman he had ever loved. It was the image of the sorrow that endureth forever. And the man felt that he was becoming mad, because he could not give expression to his idea. Then he took this image of the sorrow that endureth forever, and broke it up, and melted it, and fashioned of it an image of pleasure, of the pleasure that abideth for a moment." Wilde was a believer in a certain fatality besetting the path of the artist, and that the man is at the mercy of the idea. There are, he used to say, artists of two kinds. Some supply answers, and others ask questions. It is necessary to know if one belongs to those who answer or to those who ask questions, for the one who asks questions is never the one who answers them. There are certain works which wait for their interpretation for a long time. It is because they are giving answers to questions that have not yet been asked. For the question often comes a terribly long time after the answer. And he added further, "The soul is born old in the body. It is to rejuvenate the soul that the body becomes old. Plato is Socrates young again." Then it was 3 years before I saw him again. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Oscar Wilde, A Study, by André Gide, and translated by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. I have made my choice, have lived my poems, and though youth is gone in wasted days, I have found the lover's crown of myrtle better than the poet's crown of bays. Here tragic reminiscences begin. A persistent rumor, growing louder and louder with the fame of his successes (in London his plays were being acted in no less than 3 different theatres at the same time), attributed to Wilde strange habits, on hearing of which some people tempered their indignation with a smile, while others were not in the least indignant. It was claimed, moreover, as regards these alleged habits, that he concealed them little, and often on the other hand paraded them, some said courageously, others out of cynicism, and others for a pose. I was filled with astonishment when I heard these rumors. In no way, all the time that I had been intimate with him, had he given me the slightest ground for suspicion. But already, out of prudence, numbers of his old friends were deserting him. They had not yet actually cut him, but they no longer made a point of saying that they had met him. An extraordinary coincidence brought us together again. It was in January, 1895. I was travelling. A peevish disposition urged me on, and I sought solitude rather than novelty of scene. The weather was frightful. I had fled from Algiers to Blida, and I was about to quit Blida for Biskra. Just as I was leaving my hotel, I glanced through idle curiosity at the slate on which visitors' names were inscribed. What did I see there? By the side of my own name, actually touching it, was Wilde's. I have said that I was thirsting to be alone, so I took the sponge and rubbed my name out. Before reaching the railway station, however, I was not quite sure that a little cowardice did not underlie that act, so at once retracing my steps, I had my bag taken upstairs and wrote my name on the slate again. In the 3 years since I had seen him, for I can hardly count a short meeting in Florence the year before, Wilde had certainly changed. One felt that there was less tenderness in his look, that there was something harsh in his laughter, and a madness in his joy. He seemed, at the same time, to be more sure of pleasing, and less ambitious to succeed therein. He had grown reckless, hardened, and conceited. Strangely enough, he no longer spoke in fables, and during several days that I tarried there I was not once able to draw the shortest tale from him. My first impression was one of astonishment at finding him in Algeria. "Oh," he said to me, "just now I am fleeing from art. I want only to adore the sun. Have you ever noticed how the sun detests thought? The sun always causes thought to withdraw itself and take refuge in the shade. Thought dwelt in Egypt originally, but the sun conquered Egypt. Then it lived for a long time in Greece, and the sun conquered Greece, then in Italy, and then in France. Nowadays all thought is driven back as far as Norway and Russia, places where the sun never goes. The sun is jealous of art." To adore the sun, ah, that was, for him, to adore life. Wilde's lyrical adoration was fast becoming a frenzied madness. A fatality led him on. He could not and would not withdraw himself from it. He seemed to devote all his zeal and all his worth to overrating his destiny and overreaching himself. "My special duty," he used to say, "is to plunge madly into amusement." He used to make a point of searching for pleasure as one faces an appointed duty. Nietzsche surprised me less, on a later occasion, because I had heard Wilde say, "No, not happiness, certainly not happiness, pleasure. One must always set one's heart upon the most tragic." He would walk about the streets of Algiers, preceded, escorted, and followed by an extraordinary mob of young ruffians. He talked to them all, regarded them all with equal delight, and threw them money recklessly. "I hope to have thoroughly demoralized this town," he told me. I thought of Flaubert's saying, when he was asked what kind of reputation he most desired, "That of being a demoralizer," he replied. In the face of all this I was filled with astonishment, admiration, and alarm. I knew of his shaky position, the enmities he had created, and the attacks which were being made upon him, and I knew what dark unrest lay hidden beneath his outward pretence of pleasure. On one of those last evenings in Algiers, Wilde seemed to have made up his mind not to say a single serious word. At last I became somewhat annoyed at the exaggerated wit of his paradoxes, and I said to him, "You have got something better to talk about than this nonsense. You are talking to me as if I were the public. You ought rather to talk to the public as you know so well how to talk to your friends. Why is it your plays are not better? The best that is in you, you talk. Why do you not write it?" "Oh, well," he cried immediately, "my plays are not good, I know, and I don't trouble about that. But if you only knew how much amusement they afford! They are nearly all the results of a bet. So was Dorian Gray. I wrote that in a few days because a friend of mine declared that I could not write a novel. Writing bores me so." Then, turning suddenly towards me, he said, "Would you like to know the great drama of my life? It is that I have put my genius into my life. I have put only my talent into my works." It was only too true. The best of his writing is but a poor reflection of his brilliant conversation. Those who have heard him talk find him disappointing to read. Dorian Gray in its conception was a wonderful story, far superior to La Peau de Chagrin, and far more significant. Alas! when written, what a masterpiece spoiled! In his most delightful tales literary influence makes itself too much felt. However graceful they may be, one notices too much literary effort. Affectation and delicacy of phrase conceal the beauty of the first conception of them. One feels in them, and one cannot help feeling in them, the three periods of their generation. The first idea contained in them is very beautiful, simple, profound, and certain to make itself heard. A kind of latent necessity holds the parts firmly together, but from that point the gift stops. The development of the parts is done in an artificial manner. There is a lack of arrangement about them, and when Wilde elaborates his sentences and endeavors to give them their full value, he does so by overloading them prodigiously with tiny conceits and quaint and trifling fancies. The result is that one's emotion is held at bay, and the dazzling of the surface so blinds one's eye and mind that the deep central emotion is lost. He spoke of returning to London, as a well-known peer was insulting him, challenging him, and taunting him with running away. "But if you go back, what will happen?" I asked him. "Do you know the risk you are running?" "It is best never to know," he answered. "My friends are extraordinary. They beg me to be careful." "Careful? But can I be careful? That would be a backward step. I must go on as far as possible. I cannot go much further. Something is bound to happen, something else." Here he broke off, and the next day he left for England. The rest of the story is well known. That something else was hard labor. I have invented nothing, nor altered anything, in the last few sentences I have quoted. Wilde's words are fixed in my mind, and I might almost say in my ears. I do not say that Wilde clearly saw the prison opening to receive him, but I do assert that the great and unexpected event which astonished and upset London, suddenly changing Oscar Wilde from accuser into accused, did not cause him any surprise. The newspapers, which chose to see in him only a buffoon, misrepresented, as far as they could, the position taken up for his defence, even to the extent of wresting all meaning from it. Perhaps some day in the far future it will be seemly to lift this dreadful trial out of the mire. But not yet. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Oscar Wilde, A Study, by André Gide, and translated by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. For the crimson flower of our life is eaten by the cankerworm of truth, and no hand can gather up the fallen withered petals of the rose of youth. As soon as he came out of prison, Oscar Wilde went back to France. At Berneval, a quiet little village near Dieppe, a certain Sebastian Melmoth took up his abode. It was he. As I had been the last of his French friends to see him, I wanted to be the first to greet him on his return to liberty, and as soon as I could find out his address, I hastened to him. I arrived about midday, without having previously announced my proposed visit. M. Melmoth, whom tea with warm cordiality invited to Dieppe fairly frequently, was not expected back till the evening. He did not return till midnight. It was as cold as winter. The weather was atrocious. The whole day I wandered about the deserted beach in low spirits and bored to death. How could Wilde have chosen Berneval to live in, I wondered. It was positively mournful. Night came, and I went back to the hotel to engage a room, the same hotel where Melmoth was living. Indeed, it was the only one in the place. The hotel, which was clean and pleasantly situated, catered only for second-class boarders, inoffensive folk enough, with whom I had to dine. Rather poor company for Melmoth, I thought. Fortunately, I had a book to read, but it was a gloomy evening, and at 11 o'clock I was just going to abandon my intention of waiting up for him, when I heard the rumbling of carriage wheels. M. Melmoth had arrived, benumbed with cold. He had lost his overcoat on the way. And now that he came to think of it, he remembered that a peacock's feather which his servant had brought him the previous evening was a bad omen, and had clearly foretold some misfortune about to befall him. Luckily it was no worse. But as he was shivering with cold, the hotel was set busy to warm some whiskey for him. He hardly said, "How do you do?" to me. In the presence of others, at least, he did not wish to appear to be at all moved, and my own emotion was almost immediately stilled on finding Sebastian Melmoth so plainly like the Oscar Wilde of old, no longer the frenzied poet of Algeria, but the sweet Wilde of the days before the crisis, and I found myself taken back not 2 years, but 4 or 5. There was the same dreamy look, the same amused smile, the same voice. He occupied 2 rooms, the best in the hotel, and he had arranged them with great taste. Several books lay on the table, and among them he showed me my own Nourritures Terrestres, which had been published lately. A pretty Gothic Virgin stood on a high pedestal in a dark corner. Presently we sat down near the lamp, Wilde drinking his grog in little sips. I noticed, now that the light was better, that the skin of his face had become red and common-looking, and his hands even more so, though they still bore the same rings. One to which he was especially attached had in a reversible bezel an Egyptian scarabæus in lapis lazuli. His teeth were dreadfully decayed. We began chatting, and I reminded him of our last meeting in Algiers, and asked him if he remembered that I had almost foretold the approaching catastrophe. "Did you not know," I said, "almost for certain what was awaiting you in England? You saw the danger, and rushed headlong into it, did you not?" Here I think I cannot do better than copy out the pages on which I wrote shortly afterwards as much as I could remember of what he said. "Oh, naturally," he replied. "Of course I knew that there would be a catastrophe, either that or something else. I was expecting it. There was but one end possible. Just imagine, to go any further was impossible, and that state of things could not last. That is why there had to be some end to it, you see. Prison has completely changed me. I was relying on it for that. Is terrible. He cannot understand that. He cannot understand that I am not taking up the same existence again. He accuses the others of having changed me. But one must never take up the same existence again. My life is like a work of art. An artist never begins the same work twice, or else it shows that he has not succeeded. My life before prison was as successful as possible. Now all that is finished and done with." He lighted a cigarette and went on. "The public is so dreadful that it knows a man only by the last thing he has done. If I were to go back to Paris now, people would see in me only the convict. I do not want to show myself again before I have written a play. Till then I must be left alone and undisturbed." And he added abruptly, "Did I not do well to come here? My friends wanted me to go to the South, to recruit, because at first I was quite worn out. But I asked them to find me in the north of France, a very small place at the seaside, where I should see no one, where it was very cold, and there was hardly ever any sun. Did I not do well to come and live in Berneval? Outside the weather was frightful. Here every one is most good to me, the curé especially. I am so fond of the little church, and would you believe it? It is called Notre Dame de Lys. Now, is not that charming? And now I know that I can never leave Berneval, because only this morning the curé offered me a perpetual seat in the choir stalls. And the custom-house men, poor fellows, are so bored here with nothing to do, that I asked them if they had not anything to read, and now I am giving them all the elder Dumas novels. So I must stay here, you see. And the children, oh, the children, they adore me. On the day of the Queen's Jubilee I gave a grand fête and a big dinner, when I had 40 children from the school, all of them, and the schoolmaster to celebrate it. Is not that absolutely charming? You know that I admire the Queen very much. I always have her portrait with me." And he showed me her portrait by Nicholson, pinned on the wall. I got up to look at it. A small bookshelf was close to it, and I began glancing at the books. I wanted to lead Wilde on to talk to me in a more serious vein. I sat down again, and rather timidly asked him if he had read Souvenirs de la Maison des Morts. He gave me no direct answer, but began, "Russian writers are extraordinary. What makes their books so great is the pity they put into them. You know how fond I used to be of Madame Bovary, but Flaubert could not admit pity into his work, and that is why it has a petty and restrained character about it. It is sense of pity by means of which a work gains in expanse, and by which it opens up a boundless horizon. Do you know, my dear fellow, it was pity that prevented me from killing myself? During the first 6 months I was dreadfully unhappy, so utterly miserable that I wanted to kill myself. But what kept me from doing so was looking at the others, and seeing that they were as unhappy as I was, and feeling sorry for them. Oh dear, what a wonderful thing pity is, and I never knew it." He was speaking in a low voice, without any excitement. "Have you ever learned how wonderful a thing pity is? For my part, I thank God every night. Yes, on my knees I thank God for having taught it to me. I went into prison with a heart of stone, thinking only of my own pleasure. But now my heart is utterly broken. Pity has entered into my heart. I have learned now that pity is the greatest and most beautiful thing in the world. And that is why I cannot bear ill will towards those who caused my suffering and those who condemned me. No, nor to any one, because without them I should not have known all that. Writes me terrible letters. He says he does not understand me, that he does not understand that I do not wish every one ill, and that every one has been horrid to me. No, he does not understand me. He cannot understand me any more. But I keep on telling him in every letter, we cannot follow the same road. He has his, and it is beautiful. I have mine. His is that of Alcibiades. Mine is now that of St. Francis of Assisi. Do you know St. Francis of Assisi? A wonderful man. Would you like to give me a great pleasure? Send me the best life of St. Francis you can find." I promised it to him. He went on. "Yes, afterwards we had a charming prison governor, oh, quite a charming man, but for the first 6 months I was dreadfully unhappy. There was a governor of the prison, a Jew, who was very harsh, because he was entirely lacking in imagination." This last expression, spoken very quickly, was irresistibly funny, and as I laughed heartily, he laughed too, repeated it, and then said, "He did not know what to imagine in order to make us suffer. Now you shall see what a lack of imagination he showed. You must know that in prison we are allowed to go out only 1 hour a day. Then we walk in a courtyard, round and round, one behind the other, and we are absolutely forbidden to say a word. Warders watch us, and there are terrible punishments for any one caught talking. Those who are in prison for the first time are spotted at once, because they do not know how to speak without moving their lips. I had already been in prison 6 weeks, and I had not spoken a word to any one, not a soul. One evening we were walking as usual, one behind the other, during the hour's exercise, when suddenly behind me I heard my name called. It was the prisoner who followed me, and he said, "Oscar Wilde, I pity you, because you must suffer more than we do." Then I made a great effort not to be noticed. I thought I was going to faint. And I said, without turning round, "No, my friend, we all suffer alike." And from that day I no longer had a desire to kill myself. We talked in that way for several days. I knew his name and what he had done. His name was P. He was such a good fellow. oh, so good! But I had not yet learned to speak without moving my lips, and one evening C33 C33 was myself. C33 and A48, step out of the ranks. Then we stood out, and the warder said, "You will both have to go before the governor." And as pity had already entered into my heart, my only fear was for him. In fact, I was even glad that I might suffer for his sake. But the governor was quite terrible. He had P in first. He was going to question us separately, because you must know that the punishment is not the same for the one who speaks first and for the one who answers. The punishment of the one who speaks first is double that of the other. As a rule, the first has 15 days solitary confinement, and the second has 8 days only. Then the governor wanted to know which of us had spoken first, and naturally P, good fellow that he was, said it was he. And afterwards, when the governor had me in to question me, I, of course, said it was I. Then the governor got very red, because he could not understand it. "But P also says that it was he who began it. I cannot understand it. I cannot understand it." Think of it, my dear fellow. He could not understand it. He became very much embarrassed and said, "But I have already given him 15 days." And then he added, "Anyhow, if that is the case, I shall give you both 15 days. Is not that extraordinary? That man had not a spark of imagination. Wilde was vastly amused at what he was saying, and laughed. He was happy telling stories. "And of course," he continued, "after the 15 days we were much more anxious to speak to one another than before. You do not know how sweet that is, to feel that one is suffering for another. Gradually, as we did not go in the same order each day, I was able to talk to each of the others, to all of them, every one of them. I knew each one's name and each one's history, and when each one was due to be released. And to each one I said, 'When you get out of prison, the first thing you must do is to go to the post office, and there you will find a letter for you with some money.' And so in that way I still know them, because I keep up my friendship with them. And there is something quite delightful in them. Would you believe it? Already 3 of them have been to see me here. Is not that quite wonderful?" The successor of the harsh governor was a very charming man, oh, remarkably so, and most considerate to me. You cannot imagine how much good it did me in prison that Salome was being played in Paris just at that time. In prison it had been entirely forgotten that I was a literary person. But when they saw that my play was a success in Paris, they said to one another, "Well, but that is strange. He has talent, then." And from that moment they let me have all the books I wanted to read. I thought at first that what would please me most would be Greek literature, so I asked for Sophocles, but I could not get a relish for it. Then I thought of the Fathers of the Church, but I found them equally uninteresting. And finally I thought of Dante. Oh, Dante! I read Dante every day, in Italian, and all through, but neither the Purgatorio nor the Paradiso seemed written for me. It was his Inferno above all that I read. How could I help liking it? Cannot you guess? Hell, we were in it. Hell, that was prison. That same evening he told me a clever story about Judas and of his proposed drama on Pharaoh. Next day he took me to a charming little house about 200 yards from the hotel, which he had rented and was beginning to furnish. It was there that he wanted to write his plays, his Pharaoh first, and then one called Ahab and Jezebel. He pronounced it Isabel, which he related to me admirably. The carriage which was to take me away was waiting, and Wilde got into it to accompany me part of the way. He began talking to me again about my book, and praised it, though with some slight reserve, I thought. At last the carriage stopped. He bade me good-bye, and was just going to get out, when he suddenly said, "Listen, my dear friend, you must promise me one thing. Your Nourritures Terrestres is good." Very good. But promise me you will never write a capital I again." And as I seemed scarcely to understand what he meant, he finished it by saying, "In art, you see, there is no first person." Chapter 4 and 5 of Oscar Wilde, A Study, by André Gide, and translated by Stuart Mason. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4. Ah, what else had I to do but love you? God's own mother was less dear to me, and less dear the Cerithian rising like an argent lily from the sea. On returning to Paris, I went to give news of him to . Said to me, "But all that is quite absurd. He is quite incapable of bearing the ennui. I know him so well. He writes to me every day. I also am of opinion that he ought to finish his play first, but after that he will come back here. He has never done anything good in solitude. He needs to be constantly drawn out of himself. It is by my side that he has written all his best work. Besides, just look at his last letter." He thereupon read it to me. In it Wilde begged to let him finish his Pharaoh in peace. But in effect the letter implied that as soon as his play was written he would come back, he would find him again. And it ended with these boastful words, "And then I shall be once more the king of life." Chapter 5. Rudderless we drift athwart a tempest, and when once the storm of youth is past, without lyre, without lute or chorus, death, the silent pilot, comes at last. And a short time afterwards Wilde went back to Paris. His play was not written. It will never be written now. Society well knows what steps to take when it wants to crush a man, and it has means more subtle than death. Wilde had suffered too grievously for the last 2 years, and in too submissive a manner, and his will had been broken. For the first few months he might still have entertained illusions, but he soon gave them up. It was as though he had signed his abdication. Nothing remained in his shattered life but a mouldy ruin, painful to contemplate, of his former self. At times he seemed to wish to show that his brain was still active. Humor there was, but it was far-fetched, forced, and threadbare. I met him again on 2 occasions only. One evening on the boulevards, where I was walking with G., I heard my name called. I turned round and saw Wilde. Ah, how changed he was! "If I appear again before writing my play, the world will refuse to see in me anything except the felon," he had once said to me. He had appeared again without his play, and as he found certain doors closed in his face, he no longer sought admission anywhere. He prowled. Friends at different times tried to save him. They did all they could think of, and were for taking him to Italy, but he eluded their efforts and began to drift back. Among those who had remained faithful for the longest time, some had often told me that Wilde was no longer to be seen, and I was somewhat uneasy, I admit, at seeing him again, and what is more, in a place where so many people might pass. Wilde was sitting at a table outside a café. He ordered 2 cocktails for G. and myself. I was going to sit opposite to him in such a way as to turn my back to the passers-by, but Wilde, noticing this movement, which he took as an impulse of absurd shame (he was not entirely mistaken, I must admit), and said, "Oh, sit here near me," pointing to a chair at his side. "I am so much alone just now." Wilde was still well dressed, but his hat was not so glossy, his collar was of the same shape, but it was not so clean, and the sleeves of his coat were slightly frayed at the edges. "When I used to meet Verlaine in days gone by," he continued with an outburst of pride, "I was never ashamed of being seen with him. I was rich, light-hearted, and covered with glory. But I felt that to be seen with him was an honor, even when Verlaine was drunk. Then, fearing to bore G, I think, he suddenly changed his mood, tried to be witty, and to make jokes. In the effort he became gloomy. My recollections here are dreadfully sad. At last my friend and I got up. Wilde insisted on paying for the drinks, and I was about to say good-bye when he took me aside and with an air of great embarrassment said in a low voice, "I say, I must tell you, I am absolutely without a penny." Some days afterwards I saw him again, and for the last time. I do not want to repeat more than one word of our conversation. He told me of his troubles, of the impossibility of carrying out, or even of beginning, a piece of work. Sadly I reminded him of the promise he had made not to show himself in Paris without having finished one book. "Ah," I began, "why did you leave Berneval so soon, when you ought to have stayed there so long?" "I cannot say that I am angry with you, but—" He interrupted me, laid his hand on mine, looked at me with his most sorrowful look, and said, "You must not be angry with one who has been crushed." Oscar Wilde died in a shabby little hotel in the Rue des Beaux-Arts. 7 persons followed the hearse, and even they did not all accompany the funeral procession to the end. On the coffin were some flowers and some artificial wreaths, only one of which, I am told, bore any inscription. It was from the proprietor of the hotel, and on it were these words, "À mon locataire." To Oscar Wilde, Author of Ravenna, by Augustus M. Moore. No Mauritius am I, whose singing came to challenge King Apollo at a test, but a love-wearied singer at the best. The myrtle leaves are all that I can claim, while on thy brow there burns a crown of flame. Upon thy shield Italia's eagle crest. Content am I with Lesbian leaves to rest. Guard thou thy laurels and thy mother's name. I buried love within the rose I meant to deck the fillet of thy muse's hair. I take this wild flower, grown against her feet, and kissing its half-open lips I swear, frail though it be and widowed of its scent, I plucked it for your sake, and find it sweet. Moore Hall, September, 1878, from the Irish Monthly, Volume 6, No. 65. End of Chapters 4 and 5. End of Oscar Wilde, A Study, by André Gide.